الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So people want to pull up the text. It's the Book of Assistance by Imam Al-Haddad. You just Google Book of Assistance PDF, it'll come up. That'd be great. So we've been looking at this over the course of some months now. We're on chapter 5 that is on regular devotions, awrad. The singular is a wird, having like a daily litany of Quranic recitation, prayers, adhkar. Just to do a quick recap, this is a text on spirituality, and the way that it functions is that it presents the topic in very easily digestible chapters. Each chapter is anywhere from a page to 3 pages, 4 pages at most. The one that we're looking at right now is a little bit longer than others, but it fundamentally follows this process that allows for the reader to navigate through the content in a way that is very easily accessible. Islam as a religion doesn't divorce spirituality, ethics, and religion from one another, but it sees it as overlapping, synergized facets of a complete way of life. And if we were to start to extrapolate meaning from this text, to understand that what it does is not just give you things that you want to conceptualize or things that are theoretical, but also things to actualize and things to implement. And so if you've missed some of the sessions we've done before, they're all online. You can find them pretty easily. But you want to spend time with the text. We're going to just jump right into it, because there's a few different programs happening tonight. Sheikh Faz Jaffer is hosting a professor tonight as part of his Sacred Door Project series. It should be really good. And one of our student groups at NYU, there's 12 Muslim student clubs at NYU. It's a little different from other university campuses. One is called Shuruk. It's a theme month, and they do all kinds of amazing events. But tonight, they're hosting a panel that talks about the Uyghur crisis in China. And so depending on how tonight goes, we typically go, for the amount of time that we do, but maybe we'll wrap up a little early so people could go there and get to hear. And even if you know, right, what the situation is, one of the sisters that's speaking is herself Uyghur. She spoke here a few years ago. It is really important for us to show up for other people, especially to hear and bear witness to what it is that they're going through. And may Allah make things easy for our Uyghur brothers and sisters and all those who are facing any kind of oppression at this time. So this chapter on awrad, we're kind of in the middle of it. I'm a little congested because my kids go to school with other kids and they're just all sick all the time. And I don't know how else to explain it other than little kids are just boogery always. So now I got a lot of boogers in my nose as a result. So we were in the middle of the third page, and we looked at the paragraph that says, know that the ritual prayer has an outer form and an inner reality. We talked about this in terms of the mechanics of prayer and some of the things that go into it at that level. We talked about the timings of prayer, and I'd asked people last week and 2 weeks ago to just, between this week and last week, to see how they can relate to the windows of time of the prayer and to honor those times, right? There's a sanctity to the timings of the prayer, what we call hurm al-waqt. And then the second thing I asked people to do was to look at what the Quran says, what the Hadith say about actual prayers themselves, right? About salah. Like, what does the Quran say to us about salah and the purpose of it and what it's meant to yield and actualize? Did anybody actually do this? You did? Yeah? You're nodding your head. You did it too? Oh my gosh, look at that. What did you find?
Made a lot of intentions to pray on time, but then occasionally would miss the prayer completely, and that would like dip my motivation, and then have to bring it back up and then stick to the timings. Yeah.
And then you got back up and did it again? That's amazing, right? Like, what Shaitan wants you to do is get down and stay down, you know? And when you can fall and get back up, there's a distinct form of strength to that, right? You can't idealize or romanticize our tradition. And fundamentally, what made the first generation a strong generation wasn't that they didn't make mistakes, but they knew how to get back on their feet after they had fallen down, you know? And they knew how to help other people get back on their feet, right? And not kick people while they were down. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
It's best to pray when the time is. If you delay a little bit, it leads to the qadha. So I think that was my lesson for the week. Like, especially delaying Isha can sometimes just mean like you're going to be really tired, and it will not. Even if you pray, it's not the best of your prayers. So as soon as it's time for the window, just do it.
Yeah, and it feels different, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be specific to you as a person, do you know? I don't know what it's like these days, but when I was younger and I used to go to Lexington to eat because everything was open late at night. Has anybody ever eaten in Lexington at Curry Hill, Hondi, and Curry in a Hurry, and these places, right? Yeah, it's amazing. It's either like going to be great or it's going to ruin your stomach. There's no kind of in between when you go to these places, mashallah. But people are constantly praying in the basement of Hondi. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, if I'm there with friends, I see cab drivers coming in to pray at 2 a.m., that's because that's when they're able to pray their prayer. If they're praying Isha at 2, because that's what works for them, that's what works for them fundamentally. But you have to be attuned to you, and that's where you pay attention to the times in the way that's being said here right now. Like, you can own for yourself the difference it is when you are delaying purposely through negligence. Like, there's no reason other than I'm just being lazy. What consequently it yields you in terms of presence, and that laziness is going to impact then presence. Versus that guy could be praying with the most beautiful khushu' in the world at 2 a.m. because he's not praying at 2 a.m. because he's saying this is not my priority, but he's praying at 2 a.m. because that's what he can only fundamentally do, right? Do you get what I mean? Versus the intentionality that you're bringing now to it is one of prioritization. It's not done as an afterthought or when I feel like it. It's done when I'm at my most invigorated and most present. Do you know? I create a self-recognition that I'm bringing to this thing because that's the only thing that can be malleable in the course of a ritual that we have. You cannot change God. In Islamic theology, Allah Azza wa Jal is ghani. He is self-sufficient. He is free of need. You are not going to compel the divine. The prayer does not fundamentally change, right? It's going to be standing, bowing, kneeling, prostrating. The only thing that has capacity to change and be malleable is you. This is why you want to pay attention in this way, where this is what it was like for me when I did this in the first part of it, and this is what it did in the last part, but not limit the reflection to just the hours, but more so what was I bringing that got me to those late hours. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Other thoughts? Yeah.
I'll say that for me, when I prayed in the earlier part of like the time window, like I wanted to do more. But the longer I wait, it's like the less you want to do. Then you want to play Sunnah, then you don't want to do anything else. It's just like I'm just going to get it over before the time is over. It's like I want to do more, and I have time to do more and to give more versus like later on.
Yeah, amazing, right? It's the same idea, the same notion, right? This is why intention is the second chapter that Imam al-Haddad talks about. This is why the inner and the outer self relates to this idea of the awrad, and you have to see yourself as a whole person. But when you get knowledge of yourself, the idea is to not just get it in a vacuum, but to now think about, what do I do with this information? You know? So if I do this later, I know it's going to close certain things that are open to me if I'm to do it in a different state. Does it feel different when you pray your sunnahs versus when you don't pray them? Does it feel bad or feel good?
Great.
It feels great, right? So now you just think about it, right? That's why almost every page of the Quran challenges you as a reader to use your thinking skills. What is the point of learning something about yourself if you don't do something with that information? You see what I mean? And to be comfortable enough to get to that point. So 3 people that spoke so far, they're not uncomfortable in making themselves vulnerable, mashallah, and may Allah bless you for that, to say like, hey, you know what? I tried it this way. It was not as good as it was this way. And what brought me to this place was not necessarily as sensible as what I was giving up, instead of doing it in the way that yields me more, right? That's why it's not about honesty. You're not lying, but you have to be vulnerable to be able to own up to parts of yourself that sometimes you feel like, I can't let anybody know, let alone letting myself kind of be comfortable with it. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Did anybody look up like what the Quran says about salah? Yes, no?
Establish prayer.
It says that, yeah. Did you look that up or did you just know that? Yes, you could tell. Yeah, go ahead.
It says that you should seek forgiveness at dawn, that you should wake up in the night to pray, and that God may raise you to an honorable station.
Great. What I'd like for everyone to do is to spend some time this week into like the next couple of weeks, because we're going for Umrah on Thursday, but definitely before Ramadan. You want to know what the Quran says is the yield and gain from prayer. Like if I said to all of you, what is the verse that the Quran speaks about when it talks about fasting? You probably, to a point of kind of just expectation now, are every Ramadan hearing this verse, right? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And people will keep saying to you again, fasting was prescribed for you as it was for those that came before you, so that you might perhaps attain taqwa. That's right. Like that's what it is. And that's the potential gain from it. So what is the potential gain from your salah? What does the Quran say about this thing? It tells you to establish it, but why? What is its purpose? What is the Quran defining it to be? What does the Hadith define it to be? And you can extrapolate from other verses things that can give to you deeper meaning, that help you to understand it for what it actually is, rather than just it's an obligation that must be performed, and if I don't, I'm a bad person and I'm going to hell. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And you start to see it as a journey. When you can get satisfaction of the heart through knowledge, and you can get to a place where somebody can say, it's different when I pray it later than when I pray it earlier. when I'm just being lazy, this is what happens. And you just be real with yourself. It's different when I can add on what is recommended, right? This is what the hadith says. Like the sunnah, the nawafil, the extra prayers, the hadith, when it talks about it, it says that it's a source of love. This is what increases love. So that's what you're feeling. You might not be able to name it, right? May Allah make us from amongst those who always feel loved and never let any one of us ever feel unloved. But to get to a place where you can actually experience like a healthy, real love that has not reciprocity, because Allah's love for you is true. He is al-wadud. So if anybody says, how do you know God loves you? Well, because he tells you he loves you because of who he is, not because of who you are. He is al-wadud. But within that, this creates now the opportunity to remove barriers that allows for you to recognize the presence of that love and to increase in your love for the divine, which we're going to talk about a little bit in the next paragraph, why that's important. But you gotta engage the text. That's what it's given to you for. You don't need it in that sense of it's a requirement for you to memorize or even read, right? Nobody can tell you that you're not Muslim if you don't read the Quran. But why would you not read the Quran if you're Muslim, right? If you just think about it. Do you know what I mean? When was the last time you read it to try to draw meaning from it? Not to read it to just memorize it, which I'm not downplaying, or not to just read it to listen to bring kind of solace to your heart, which also is an amazing thing. That you don't even have to know what the words mean in order for it to kind of impact and transform your inside, but to ponder and reflect upon it. If a book that you can't even understand its language can bring you that kind of peace, can you imagine what it could do for you if you started to actually extrapolate meaning from it and live and actualize what its words were, right? And just at a pace that makes sense for you. Do you get what I mean? But it's got to start somewhere. And so pick up your Quran, read it in its translation of whatever language. You can go on your phone and just type in verses about Salah. And you probably get a million different, you don't even have to do anything. You don't go to a library. You don't have to look up where the book is in the library. You literally have a computer in your pocket 24 hours a day. All you have to do is type with your thumbs verses in the Quran about Salah. Just look at it. Hadith about Salah. Read them and then think about them. Right? So it helps you to understand a little bit better what this thing is. It fits into the awrad because Imam al-Haddad is talking about in your daily wird, you can have also the presence of the performance of additional rak'ahs, more cycles of prayer. So why don't we move to the next paragraph? It says, you should not occupy yourself with unspecified supererogatory prayers at a time designated for a sunnah. Does anybody want to read? Do you want to read?
I can't.
You can't?
I can't.
You
I can.
Yeah, great. Go for it.
You should not occupy all your time with only, is that the one?
You should not occupy yourself with unspecified supererogatory prayers.
Which page is it on?
Page
19.
Okay.
The last paragraph.
You should not occupy yourself with unspecified supererogatory prayers at a time designated for a sunnah which the Messenger of God either did or spoke about until you have completed the maximum designated number. An example of this is the rak'ahs laid down before and after the obligatory prayers. These are sufficiently well known as to need no further comment. Another example is the witr prayer, which is a well-established and certain prayer. Some scholars have been of the opinion that it is obligatory, and the Prophet has said many blessings and peace be upon him. God is witr, not an even number, and he likes what is witr. Therefore, observe the witr. and whether it's truth. Its maximum is 11 rakats, and its appropriate minimum 3. For those who have an established habit of rising for prayer during the latter part of the night, it is better to perform it then. The Prophet has said, may peace and blessings be upon him. Make your night prayer the witr. But those who have no such habit would do better to perform it after the night Isha prayer. Another example is the mid-morning Dhuhr prayer, which is very useful and blessed prayer. Its maximum is 8 rakats, though some have said 12 and its minimum 2.
You finish the sentence, go ahead.
The best time for it is when the sun is high and about a quarter of the day has gone.
Okay, so what Imam al-Haddad is doing is he's giving you examples of already established sunnah prayers, right? The term sunnah has a literal definition. It refers to the authoritative example of any individual. So when we go for Umrah, inshallah, in the coming days, and we go between the hills of Safa and Marwa and perform what is called the Sa'i, we're going to be doing that in the footsteps of Hajar, peace be upon her. We're following the sunnah of Hajar, is what we would say. And if you said that, you wouldn't be wrong. When we refer to it in a technical sense, from the standpoint of our legal tradition, the sunnah is referring to the authoritative example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And within that, we have genres of our tradition that are made up of individual narrations that are called hadith. A hadith refers to the actions, the sayings, or the tacit approval of the Messenger of God. That if he did something, he said to do something, or he saw you do something and didn't say don't do that, it all encompasses like this hadith literature. And a hadith is made up of 2 parts. We have a part that is the actual text, is called the matan, right? So, innamal a'malu bin niyat is the matan. Indeed, actions are by intentions. That's like the words of the hadith. You then have the isnad of the hadith, which is the chain of transmitters that goes from person to person to person. In most instances, back to the Prophet ﷺ. Some instances will go to a companion. There's entire kind of terminologies and explanations of this that is, a separate conversation. But where and how we draw meaning from these sources creates for us a basis of what is called the sunnah. Why do we follow the sunnah? Or why do you follow the sunnah? Or why should a Muslim follow the sunnah? Does the question make sense? Okay, so why don't we turn to the persons next to us. If you don't know the person's name, just share your name. Ideally in pairs, but no more than 3, so everybody gets a chance to talk. If you're not sitting next to somebody, if you want to come closer together, that's fine too. But why? Why should a Muslim follow the sunnah? What does it mean for us to do that? Does that make sense? And then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay, so why do we follow the Sunnah? Like if somebody came in and said to you, hey, I just became Muslim, explain this to me. Like, why is this something Muslims do? What would you say? What would you talk about? Yeah.
I think it's at the fundamental level, it's about love. Like there's a chain of love between Allah and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you just want to link yourself to that. I think there's a hadith that speaks about loving him and then Allah will love you, but I don't want to quote it because I don't know it fully. But
there's a verse in the Quran that says it, right?
Okay, yeah.
قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. That say, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ. Say that if you love Allah, فَاتَّبِعُونِي, then follow me, يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ, then Allah will love you. Why? Well, let's get back to that. So love is like a part of it. But like why? Like what's the point of that love? Why do you need that love? Or what can it do for you?
For the afterlife.
For the afterlife? Okay, great. You were going to say something?
I was going to answer the original question. I could try to
answer the original question. Go ahead.
Yeah, because the Quran generally is meant to be more overarching message, while the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, he was said to the teacher for the more ritualistic aspects of the religion, which is why we follow it, so that we can connect to that and know what to do on our day-to-day.
But why? Yeah.
So, what I wanted to say about the question that was brought up is how it's these little practical things, and I also discussed with my group, like Tina mentioned, it's drinking water a certain way, 3 sips, and there's clearly some benefit to that. And following sunnahs, there's certain levels. It's individual, it's with family, eating together with family, and it builds compassion, it bonds, there's connection, and there are so many benefits for following it. Could be something as simple as smiling. May not have a huge impact on someone, but it can have a huge impact on you. It's small practical things you can incorporate into your life every day to have an impactful difference.
Great. Somebody else had their hand raised? Yeah.
I think that it's the active choice that we make to do the additional steps that bring us closer to God intentionally. And it's like, you feel the difference between when you're obligated to do it versus not. And I think that, to answer your question, it's a choice. That active choice allows us to gain that closeness. Really.
Okay. So, why is it easy to leave behind the sunnah?
It's not a requirement.
Huh?
It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement. Okay. What are you leaving behind when you leave it behind? It's not like questions that are like the actual answers. There's not, I don't want you to answer it the way you feel like you're supposed to, but the same way, which is amazing. When we started, I was like, man, I pray and I'm lazy and it's terrible, right? You gotta think and make yourself open to this in that way, because then it's gonna be something you're engaging with your heart and through yourself. You have to put your business out there. That's not what I'm asking you to do, but to think deeply about this. Do you know? There's nothing without meaning in Allah's plan. And the claim is, if you follow this religion, there will be benefit in it for you. So where and how you start to think, right? The verse that talks about this, for example, that roots this in love. Why do you need love? Why do you both need to love and to feel loved? Right? قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. That follow me and Allah will love you. Why do you, as the reader of this verse, need to know that love is in two directions? What do you gain from loving, and what do you gain from feeling loved? Do you get what I mean? What do you get from it? Yeah.
I think it changes the nature of the relationship you have with Allah and religion. Instead of it just being an obligation, or you have to do it because otherwise there's punishment, it becomes something you're doing because you love someone and because you want to feel that love. And I think that also relates to your previous question about why do sometimes I get left behind, because I feel like sometimes when you're doing something just out of an obligation, you're just trying to do the bare minimum, and then you're just trying to hit okay, this is a required thing because I don't want to go to hell, so you're just trying to hit those bare minimums. And so if you're thinking of it from that approach, the sunnah might just get left behind.
Yeah, definitely. But if it gets left behind, I'm not saying this, it's not soundbite, right? But to think about it to its logical conclusion, so what? Right? And this concept of love is important. Have you ever felt loved or loved someone? What does that do to you? You as a human, why is love something that is good for you? To give love and to feel loved. What is the point of that? That's what this verse is saying, right? فَاتَّبِعُونِي, right? O Prophet, say, follow me. And the challenge that comes in now is not to limit it to just follow and then you stop, but to understand that the residual gain from it is this love, this mahabba. Why? Why is that an important thing? What does it feel like when you feel loved? Does it feel bad? Right? No, right? Right? No, it feels good. What does it feel like when you don't feel loved? Does it feel terrible? Like when you are sad, and then you also experience sadness alone. It's crazy. May Allah protect us from that. When you can feel loved versus you give love. And it's hard, because so much of what our tradition talks about is rooted in concepts like this. This last week, I've had conversations with at least 4 people who come from upbringings and family lives that are very devoid of love. One person spoke to me and said to me certain things that she was quoting that I had read just a couple of days before, the author who had written these same quotes about what the challenges are when you grow up in a toxic home or in a loveless home or an abusive home. May Allah protect us from it or from ever becoming it. He says the challenge when you're a child that grows up in a home like that is that you are not learning to not love your parents, but you're learning to not love yourself. And that ends up happening to a lot of people. In the absence of feeling loved. In the presence of feeling loved, it makes a categorical shift. My love for you can give me courage and audacity, right? I can feel really bold. But you loving me becomes a source of strength for me. It can allow for me to do all kinds of things. The Prophet's love for you has him stand and pray in the late hours of the night. His companions asked, what are you doing? He said, dua for his brothers. And they were like, that's us. And he was like, no, it's not you. This is going to be the people who come after me, who never met me or saw me, but they still believe in me. Those are my brothers and sisters. That's you. May Allah make us from amongst them.
Amen.
If you don't start to recognize why it's important to know what the Quran says about things like salah, about things like following the messenger, and you don't see how it is not just rhetorical, but religion, spirituality, ethics, they overlap in our tradition. Why is it important, this thing of love? And then if you buy into it, what it's telling you is this becomes the mechanism to harness and experience this thing of love. How many times you ever sit with somebody and the world is just heavy and they're in this place and they're like, I think God is punishing me. You're like, what makes you think that? And it becomes this downward spiral, a lot of which gets rooted in the absence of support systems and individuals that never really showed real love. And it's hard, but at some level, the cycle has to stop perpetuating itself, with some of us saying, that's not what I'm going to pass on next. But if you never think about it, and you never allow for yourself to be present in it, it doesn't mean you can't yield some gain. You will feel increase in Ramadan. May Allah make us those who reach it and benefit from it. You're going to see yourself having amazing experiences. You're going to pray in the late hours of the night. You're not going to feed your stomach. You're going to be feeding your heart. It's going to be all kinds of things. The last nights are going to be so different from the first nights, but then you're going to leave it behind. Why would you do that? Just think about it. Why would you pray late after you know praying earlier makes you feel better? Why would you be lazy and delay it when you know when you do that, it makes you not take from it what you gain from it when you do it at a different time? Some of what will anchor, not definitively, but become a part of it, is the reflections on some of this. Is this what love feels like? Is this what an unconditional love feels like? That you love me without me having to be perfect, Ya Allah? You embrace me with all of my imperfections in ways that I don't even embrace myself? Somebody as wretched as me can stand and ask of you, and you still hear my prayers? Despite any person who's told me that you're not this enough or not that enough, or has pointed out what is lacking as opposed to what is actually there, has made me turn to things that just give me momentary satisfaction because the continuity of pain in the day, I just have to run away from it. You accept me even when I don't even accept parts of myself? If you can't understand the sunnah through love, then you're going to give in to nafsani thoughts, the lower self that tells you, hey man, it's just sunnah, you don't have to do it. Circumstantially, it can be difficult for some of us, right? But it's not from a lack of trying. You're in a place where the world around you isn't conducive to your belief as a Muslim. You got to do the minimum, but the minimum is not what you aspire towards. And where you can sit and you can think about it in terms of a recognition that this is something that I gained from this. That the verse is there, and I just have to decide, do I buy into it or not? You know what I mean? And you can look at other verses that talk about who the Prophet is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His character, his goodness, it's impeccable. You gotta think, I mean, have you ever met some people who really love the Prophet of God? You know? Not people who claim that they do it just in and out, but if you sit with them, you're like, man, how does this person really believes in this? I've been in all different parts of the world. And you see some of these brothers, they come out of the prison systems and they find Islam in the prison. And they've done things that, subhanAllah, may Allah forgive them for it. And they walk out of the prison. I'm not saying you should do this or not do this, but they leave. They have kohal under their eyes now. They're in a place where their dress has changed. The manifestations of love are something that you couldn't imagine when that person went in, that they would come out even looking like this, right? But when you're in love with somebody, everybody knows you're in love with that person. You know what I mean? I know a lot of you are not all college students. Some of you are. I'm not sitting here people gazing all day, but I can sit and I can tell when some of these awkward kids are very into some of the other awkward kids. I can tell when some of you are really into other people. You don't even know that you are, but I know. You can tell when somebody is in love. You can. And you can tell when somebody is in a place where the relationship is not healthy and makes no sense. I teach a class in our public policy school on leadership, and we were talking about forgiveness the other day. This kid in the class raises his hand, and he said, why is it that we get so upset when somebody mistreats somebody that we're friends with or we care about, but we don't get that upset for ourselves? I said, well, sometimes it's really easy to share wisdom with people, but it's really hard to drink your own tea. And you can get up to a place where it's just very different because inwardly you make excuses because you believe that these are people who are supposed to love me in a certain way. And so dissonance then defines what they do in such a manner that I now start telling myself that, well, I must be the challenger, I must be the problem. This is why it's remarkable that the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had all of the companions that he had. Individuals who smoked, who committed zina, who drank alcohol, who came and said, I have all these struggles. They were his closest companions. And his love for them did not diminish in any capacity. People who nobody thought there was anything good with, that the Prophet said about them that they will have my company in Jannah because they simply love Allah and His Messenger. And then that quality of love. It's not aspirational in the sense that you feign it, but its acquisition has to be rooted in, why is this something God is giving to me for my benefit? And then when you start to piece it together in this way, the performance of the sunnahs are not done without understanding whose sunnah you're following. But you can say, it doesn't have to make sense to me for it to be true. But those 2 rak'ahs that are worth the entire world and everything in it, the Prophet says, of sunnah prayers at Fajr, how am I going to ever leave those behind? The adaptation of what becomes prophetic confirmed practice doesn't stem from anything other than a place of love, because we need love to function fully. That's why love is a conditional part of the completion of your iman. Love for people what you love for yourself. Love one another. It's all like there in our tradition. You know what I mean? When I went to Myanmar the first time, and I came back and told people about the Rohingya, may Allah make things easy for them, and I'm talking about ethnic cleansing and genocide that they experienced. I'm in a masjid in Texas, and I gave a khutbah that I preface with this hadith about loving for people what you love for yourself. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he says in this hadith that the word brother in it, love for your brother what you love for yourself, is not in reference to your brother in faith, but your brother in humanity. That you just love people because you love people. Imam Nawawi is a scholar that is accepted by people across ideological perspectives within the Sunni tradition of Islam. Nobody hates on Imam Nawawi, and he's saying that's what this hadith means. When I got off the mimbar, people came and started talking to me. There was a brother that came. He looked like he had gone to Jummah his whole life. I'm not stereotyping, but pick in your head what you think a Muslim man who has probably gone to Jummah for like 30, 40 years of his life probably looks like when he is in a masjid and coming up to the mimbar to talk to the khatib. And he wasn't being confrontational, but you could see that he was wrestling with something. And he's much older than me. So I said, what can I do for you, uncle? And he said, I don't understand something you said. And I said, what is it? And he said, are you telling me we're supposed to just love people because they love people? And I said, yeah, like, what do you mean? And he was like, but doesn't the Quran say this and this? And I was like, doesn't the Quran also say this? He was like, yeah. And he said, but what about this? And I was like, doesn't the Hadith say this? And he said, yeah. And then he said, I've never heard anybody ever tell me that I should just love people because they're people. And I went the next day to a smaller gathering and shared this story with a group of people in a kind of private brunch. And then people started to like scoff and like, oh man, I can't believe this guy. And I was like, you're missing the point of what I'm saying, right? Don't give shaitan victory over yourself or over your brother. But just think fundamentally, how is it possible? This man even went to Jummah for 20 years of his life. 30 minutes each time, 26 hours of oration in a year. That's 520 hours worth of content he's exposed to, and he's never heard once that you're supposed to just love people because they're people. And I said to those people there, I was like, have you ever heard it? And everybody was like, no, we never heard it either. That was probably why you're laughing at this man you've never met before. Do you get what I mean? And you gotta sit with it and think about it sometimes so that it brings what it's intended to bring. In the performance of these prayers, Imam al-Haddad is saying, is don't seek to add something where the Sunnah has already established it. Do what the Sunnah tells you to do in those extra moments. Pray Salatul Ishraq at the time of sunrise because that's a Sunnah prayer. Pray the Duha prayer as he outlines here. Pray Tahajjud. Qiyamul Layl, do all these different things that the Prophet ﷺ did. Pray these prayers. Why? Because of love. There's no other recipe that's going to get it to you in the way that this can get it to you. And then you allow for yourself to just kind of understand and tap into fundamentally what it's about. And it's hard. It's hard because of just how harsh the world can be. But think about how you feel when you feel loved versus when you don't feel loved. And the idea here is the Sunnah becomes a mechanism to which you can feel uninterrupted the presence of Allah's love. And then whatever box the world seeks to put you in, you are bigger than it. Relationship ain't work out, the job didn't work out, family is this, friends are this is a challenge, that's a challenge. It's a paradigm shifting mechanism. The love that you can harness from it. You can't think about it as a fluffy conversation. You also have to sit with what you're uncomfortable with to let yourself sometimes acknowledge, like, where I land right now is the product of a lot of things that were positive, but also potentially things that were heavy. But the gain has to be rooted in the pursuit of something. It's not simply just empty, but there's a concluding yield that also brings now benefit that you can't get unless you actually do this thing. Do you get what I mean? That's why it's different when you're in this place where you're like, I am going to eat with my right hand. I am going to sit down when I eat. I'm going to give salams. It's one of the few times the doing of a sunnah outweighs the reward of a fard. Because initiating a salam is not an obligation, it's a recommendation, but the return of the salam is a fard. It has to be something that's given. Do you get what I mean? And then you want to deepen in it. You start to read these books, not to like weaponize or be like, man, you're not following this or you're not following that. The Prophet is a messenger of God. God is a God of all of his creation. And so the messenger is a messenger to all of creation in all of our diversity. It's going to look a little bit different. It is fundamentally ridiculous and so much on point with what we know of shaitan that foundational theologies in our religion, the oneness of God, the finality of the prophethood, everything that comes along with it becomes now the source of much academic debate and just divisiveness within Muslim communities around the world. So you just connect to your prophet. And I would say look at it through this prism of love. And then allow for yourself to deepen in it. You should read the seerah literature, the prophetic biography of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You don't like to read, or you like to listen to stuff more, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf has a great English seerah that you can probably find all over the internet. Back in the day, those who are as old as me or older, it was in this like giant cassette tape box, right? That you could just pop them in, and there was like 50 tapes with multiple hours of recordings on all of them. Listen to all of it. When you're in love, or you're trying to increase love, you just want to like take whatever you can, right? Do you understand what I mean? Right? Like we had a Bengali brother that used to come here and he would see me, and he was married a German woman, right? This man was straight out of Bangladesh, and he was sitting in my office. He had a bunch of books in his hand, and one of the books he had in his hand was German 101. And I was like, what are you doing, man? He was like, I'm not doing anything. I was like, why do you have this German book? And he told me, I want to marry this German girl, and I'm going to speak to her in German, and I'm going to tell her in German how much I love her. And I was like, I hope this works out for you. This is amazing, right? That's what you do, you know? When Qais is with Layla's dog, and he is treating the dog in such an effective way, the people say, what are you doing with this dog? And Qais, whose love is so real that nobody else understands it except him. This is why they call him Majnoon. He says it's not a dog, it's Layla's dog. Do you understand? You can't pray your sunnah prayers in such a way that they give you that sense of self that you don't even care that the people are saying, what are you doing with this dog? It doesn't even faze you. Why are you dressed like this? Why don't you curse? How come I never see you drinking or smoking or being racist or breaking promises? How come you're in a place where you are so calm all the time and collected? Why do you spend your weekends in soup kitchens and visiting the sick and doing these things? Because it's not just a role model, it's the prophet of God. And love in a way that when you tap into it, it makes you feel things that you can't even imagine. It's not like a conditional love that many people put on us. It's an unconditional love of al-wadud. And within this is the potential roadway to gain access to feeling that sense of strength and empowerment. You see what I mean? That one is not like, man, I gotta pray sunnahs because everybody else prayed their sunnahs, and I feel bad that I'm not praying them, you know? But you wanna then pick up the book and read it. You want to engage like the hadith. If you've never picked up a book of hadith, so I was saying Sheikh Hamza has one, Sir Qadi has one in English that you could go through. The Qalam Institute has a podcast that's a Sirah podcast that Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda has done. It's all in English. Learn about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life. Don't let the fiqh be the first aspect of accessing the sunnah. But as you kind of learn the basics of your prayer, because you have to learn how to pray and do all these other things, there's a book called Content of Character that's just a collection of hadith in English that's just going to tell you hadith about virtues and values. Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, who has one of the major canonical texts on hadith, Sahih Bukhari in the Sunni tradition, he's got a book that's called Al-Adab al-Mufrad. It's just about virtues and values. You just read it and look at like what it means, the character manifest. Do you get what I'm saying? And then it becomes an entry point. This is why Imam al-Haddad is saying this. Like, yeah, do this, but don't let it take you away from this thing, because this is where it's at. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? Okay. What I want you to do just for 2 minutes, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. What are you taking away from this? If you could turn to the person next to you and just kind of talk it out. What are some of the takeaways from this conversation, right? And then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead.
How that person
No, we're good. It's just like, I think by tomorrow we'll be good. Kareem, my son was sick. That's not a problem.
Fever?
No, it wasn't bad. I used to get sick all the time. I hardly get sick anymore. It's pretty good, but like, this was more, I think like, maybe a few days ago I felt like a little bit something in my throat. It wasn't bad. No. It's more just, I think for me, he had like a pretty bad cold. So I think I caught a little bit.
Yeah, I almost rolled sick.
Really?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. How do you think it's going? Makes sense.
You wrap it up.
What time do we start? 6:30?
6:40.
Yeah, I think maybe in like 10-15 minutes. I texted Rita and she said that I texted her like a while ago, and she said they were going to wrap up soon. So I think their event wasn't very long, which is why they ended it early. Sheikh Faz told me not to end it early. He said he thought like the audiences would have been different anyway.
Yeah.
The Rehab said there was more than 50 people at the event, which is pretty good.
It's good crowd.
Yeah, I think it's good. Okay, should we come back? What are some of the things we're taking away from this?
So unconditional love.
Huh?
So unconditional love.
That's what you're taking away? You unconditionally love everyone then? Yeah. That's the goal? Yeah, no, right? I mean, it's part of it, right? لن تدخل الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولن تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. You will not enter paradise until you believe. You will not believe until you love one another, right? It's a reflexive utilization of the verb tuhabu. Like there has to be some of that there. You know what I mean? You gotta really think about what that means fundamentally. To like love people, which is not tolerate the ugliness of racism, classism, xenophobia in any manner, right? Like real love for people because they share humanity with you. You know, there's no other system that claims this type of revolutionary love as a condition of its faith. You know, like you just love like people in that way, right? It's crazy. It's very intense. Mashallah. What else? What else are you taking away? Yeah.
I kind of feel like this might be a little bit controversial, but I feel like it's kind of schizophrenic the way that a lot of American Muslims feel, because like one of the ways I found love for the Prophet Muhammad is like through like art and music and growing up, and then poetry. And I feel like growing up, you know, there was always like voice in the back of my mind that's like, this is haram. And so I've struggled a lot with that. But alhamdulillah, it just feels like a very express sort of way to get back to love for me whenever I'm out of it for a while.
Yeah, amazing. Mashallah. You know, and Allah increase you and all of us in our love for the Prophet ﷺ, right? And also like a love for yourself, like a healthy love, right? Loving for your brother and sister what you love for yourself is the hadith that talks about loving others. But loving for others what you love for yourself means also it's okay to love things for yourself. Like it's okay to love yourself, right? It's not a love of the self, for your lower self. It's really hard to love fully when you don't love yourself fully. You get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? What else? Other takeaways? Anything come to mind? So this is one of those things where like the performance of an act and the benefit that's yielded doesn't have to be named or understood in order for you to still gain from it. But there's that much more that you can gain once you start to be able to name like the consequence of something, right? And you can like say, wow, this is what this is, right? You don't have to buy into it, but I'm going to tell you not in the frame of the Sunnah, but in the frame of Ramadan. Just spend some time in reflective mode, open to like where you see gain and growth in yourself, but to also understand and try to name what you're experiencing through Ramadan. And not just because it's Ramadan, because this is going to be like a very like kind of, it's the way that people see this, you know, but the intention behind what they say doesn't like mean what it should be, right? So a month after, when you are in Shawwal and you've celebrated Eid and you've done all these things, mashallah, right? May Allah make it a joyous Eid for all of us. You're in this place where you're like, man, I was doing that just because it was Ramadan, right? You're belittling yourself in ways that don't make any sense. That's the point of Ramadan, right? Like, if I lost 10 pounds by like eating differently, and then I came, we were talking about it. I was like, oh man, I just lost it because like of that diet I had. Well, yeah, that's the point of the diet, man. What do you mean? I don't have a headache anymore. It was only because I took that Tylenol, right? Like, nobody talks like that about the thing doing what it's supposed to do. But the comment is something that makes reflection inhibited, as opposed to being like, wow, like, look at what Ramadan showed me. And it did exactly what it said it was going to do, right? Then won't the rest of these things potentially also do what they claim to do? And what's the missing piece then? Other than me bringing a little bit of my own cognitive ability to this. This is why, like, you lead with your heart and you lead with your mind. And you're in a place where you allow for these two things to be present. As you sit and you think like, whoa, when I like sit and pray with people, or I don't eat so much during the day, or like I'm smart about what I'm putting into my body, or I surround myself with friends who laugh as we break fast and then we pray together, or like people who love me with their hands, they serve me food, and like we eat food together. There's barakah in this. My sleep changes. The amount of things that I'm consuming inwardly that are positive change. All of it changes. Don't you think that does something to you? That's what you gotta do. You just gotta think about it and then say, why am I gonna let it go? This is why our predecessors in our spiritual tradition would say that if like the kings of the kingdoms of the world knew the treasures that we had in our hearts, they would go to whatever war they possibly could to be able to harness the jewels that were within us. Because it's something that escapes so many people, and Islam makes it so simple. Just don't be lazy when you pray, and prayer will taste different to you. That's it. It didn't say you have to lead the prayer. It didn't say you have to read the whole Quran in your prayer. It said you will get out of it what you put into it, right? So if all you get out of the sunnah is that somebody taught you to pray your sunnah prayers before they taught you whose sunnah you're following, then why wouldn't you get out of it what you put into it? And it makes it easier to leave a little bit of it behind. You get what I mean? So try to engage some of these texts. Engage the prophetic biography. If you've already read it, read it at this phase of your life. Because as you have evolution in your life, there's going to also be different things that speak to you in different ways. If you don't have time to read, you're lying to yourself. You should make time to read actual books, right? But also, there's the podcast that I mentioned to you, right? There's the audio files. Sheikh Yasser Qadi has a great Sirah collection. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf has a great Sirah collection. Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jagda, the Qalam podcast, has a great Sirah podcast that's there. It goes in detail. It goes in depth. Like, learn it not to rotely memorize things. Not so you can answer a question. What are the names of all of the Prophet's children? What year did this happen and that happen? Yeah, that's a part of it. So you can see how things relate to each other. And there's growth through understanding the timeline and chronology, but it's not absolute. You gotta like ponder upon it and make the Quran concrete, because it's being lived in real time by this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And then he is doing all these things. We only talked about one facet of this. We could have talked about it in a bunch of different ways, right? You want to feel content? He feels content, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He goes through like hell regularly on a daily basis. It's like tough and difficult in his life. The burden of revelation is actual burden. Its physical burden is outlined in the hadith. Companions say, like the prophet's on a camel, he gets revelation, the camel's got to go down on the ground. He can't move because it's literal heaviness, right? The prophet's leg was on somebody's leg, revelation comes down. I never felt a weight like this in my life. He's carrying this weight, this burden, and then he still smiles at children. He still plays games with his wife. He still is joking with his companions. Do you know what I mean? I came back from Turkey. I want to make things easy for them, and was walking through like what is literal, like it looks like just war zone, right? SubhanAllah. And we were like playing with kids and talking and this kind of stuff. And I was in my office the other day with somebody, and I said to her, I haven't laughed in 2 weeks. And it made me just like really think, subhanAllah, what does that feel like? And just taking a little bit of people's trauma and the consequence of what it yields. And I'm grateful for the recognition of it, but to then understand, despite what he went through, he still smiled at everybody. Do you get what I mean? And when you have aspirations, right, you think, I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, mashallah, I love them to death. They're amazing blessings in my life. And so much of like what they would do is what we do. They just replicate and follow in our mannerisms and actions. I did this when I was a little kid, right? I have an older sister. Some of you have met her. Her name is Alia. She works for the city comptroller. She used to run our professionals group. It's really nice. Mashallah, my older sister. We have home videos on VHS tapes where I'm like 3 years old, where Kashmiri, my family moved to Pakistan after partition, so we grew up speaking Urdu and Punjabi in our house. And if you know anything about these languages, right, they're gendered languages. The way Arabic is gendered and other languages are gendered. And so the way that you would speak in the feminine is different from the masculine. So my sister, she's a girl. She spoke like a girl. And on tape, we have her walking and my dad's like, Alia, come here, right? He'll say in Urdu, Alia idhar aao. And she'll say, Abu main aa rahi hu. And then I'll follow her. And just as she's skipping in her dress, I'm like, main bhi aa rahi hu, right? Like I'm coming too, the way a girl would say. But I'm just following who it is that is there in front of me. That's what I do. Do you get what I mean? One of the reasons why people have challenges in receiving things from people who don't have their own healing is that they're not able to raise the child that's in front of them because they're still trying to raise the child that's inside of them. And you got to be able to harness that and recognize that the child that you were is still within you and it followed something. Now you got to choose to make it follow what's going to give it a sense of upliftment and a sense of meaning and healing. Do you get what I mean? That's a conscious decision. Does that make sense? Right? So don't just not do it. Like, go and do it. Read these books, listen to those podcasts, Content of Character. It's a small book of hadith. Al-Adab al-Mufrad, you can find it online. Just Google it and just read what the hadith said. It talks about virtue and character. It gives you a sense of like different aspects of who the Prophet was, alayhi salam. And then you just sit and you start to think about it. What does it mean to like look up to somebody? What does it mean to have a messenger? What's the whole point of all of this? And what is it drawing me towards? And then you start to think like, man, I can adapt some of these sunnahs and go at a pace that makes sense for me. Does that make sense? Yeah? And like an understanding of what the sunnah entails, you know? So it doesn't necessitate you committing cultural apostasy of some kind, right? Because you stay true to who you are. And the prevailing kind of ethos of our religion manifests in all of its diversity and beauty, and you remaining true to who you are. You know what I mean? So I'm from Jersey. When I was little, and I had family members, and I was eating like baked ziti, and they'd be like, we don't eat baked ziti. I'm like, we don't? Right? And somebody's like, you know, you shouldn't eat those things. And in my head, I couldn't understand the statement, right? Like, it tastes good, you know? There's no pork in this thing. There's not even any meat in it. I'm just eating noodles with pasta, like with cheese on it. Like, what's the problem fundamentally, right? Do you get what I mean? That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about following the Sunnah. It's not to become something that you're not, right? It's just to understand like how the Prophet's example fits into where you come from and how you start to adopt that with the love that it's intended for. Does that make sense? Okay.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.